Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to the Tuesday briefing room, going above and beyond how entity analytics builds the big picture. This is Rebecca Joswick filling in for Eric Kavanaugh today. He's off in Germany having a great time. You can tweet to me. I'm pretty easy at Rebecca Joswick. I must have been the first Rebecca Joswick to get that one. Or you can email me, RebeccaJoswick@bloorgroup.com. The mission, as most of you know, for the briefing room, is to reveal the essential characteristics of enterprise software, both the good and the bad and the nitty-gritty. We really like to provide a detailed analysis and a forum of today's innovative technologies. Who's doing what problems are being solved, what disruptive technologies are coming out, and give vendors a chance to explain their products in a really detailed way, and give you, the audience, an opportunity to ask deep questions to find out how will this solution better my organization, how will this solution fit into my architecture. And of course, we always have an analyst on hand to ask those tough questions that you might not think of. We do tweet with the hashtag of BriefR, so if you have some comments during the show, go ahead and tweet away. You can also put your questions in the Q&A pane down there at the bottom right, or you can go ahead and chat to me directly. I am Eric Kavanaugh today. We like to keep our topics grouped by month, so this month we've had data science and advanced analytics. We switched next month to innovators. It just kind of seemed like there's so much disruptive stuff going on right now, and we had so much interest in varying things that we kind of just decided to change it there. So we've got some really interesting vendors for you next month. And then August, finish out the summer with Hadoop and Spark. So today's topic, I kind of got an email this morning, as I'm sure many of you get these emails from family members with the whole family on there that talk about, the old days and how things were better, and you see those memes and all that stuff. And this one was about that very thing, about simpler days. And, it just reminded me of, in the context of technology, of course there was technology then in its own way, but it was simpler. You have a town, you have a general store, and the people who come in probably come in every week or whenever, and the person who owns it knows every person by name, and they might have a ledger, they might have some information, that they keep track of, especially if somebody owes money. But, that was pretty much it. And if relationships didn't change much, the community didn't change much, or it changed very slowly, marketing was very local, and if somebody moved from that town, they probably went to the general store in the next town. They didn't continue a relationship with that general store that they used to go to. It's highly unlikely that they would have stuff delivered. I mean, that's just how it was back then. Of course, there was no internet, which changed so much of the relationship between customers and businesses, right? And so today we think of a customer, what is a customer? And in relationship with entities, people, places, things, the relationships they have with each other, the patterns you can derive from really getting a close look at those entities, it's quite a different thing, and it's not a bad thing. It's just more complex. And, would I want to go back to the old days? Not really. But, bless the technology we have and the vendors who are out there trying to make sense of all the new and complex patterns and relationships that are out there. So today we have our own analyst, Dr. Robin Bloor of the Bloor Group, and we have Novetta. Novetta is a really interesting company. They do advanced analytics, kind of, with expertise in a lot of different areas, cybersecurity, media open source analytics. But today we're going to learn about Novetta Entity Analytics, which is an entity resolution application that really helps build a complete picture of your customer from multi-source data. And probably the most important thing about that, not because you can gather data from multiple sources and put it together in a table, but it's really where you can detect patterns and relationships between those customers and all the relationships they have outside of themselves that can really help nail down more analytics in your company. And from Novetta, we have Scott Nichols. He has been the product manager at Novetta. He's been there for 14 years and actually did some, got a little certificate from the NSA, so that's pretty cool. I'm sure he's got some stories that he won't talk about today, but instead, I'll go ahead and pass the ball over to Scott. Scott, take it away.
Thank you. So as Rebecca said, I'm Scott Nichols, and I worked at Novetta for about 14 years. I got my start right after 9/11, and basically the very first project that I got thrown into was doing data analytics and entity resolution, looking for co-conspirators from the 9/11 hijackings. And back in those days, I mean, that was in 2001, 2002, it was all about trying to bring lots of different data together and find things that maybe where you have a lot of different, the same individual, many things, and pulling them together. And from there, I kind of went into a lot of data analytics and a lot of continuing with the entity resolution spin, but trying to do that at scales and speeds that just wasn't being done at that time. And it was kind of before Hadoop and before a lot of different big data things. And I've kind of never really lost sight of that. I mean, I've been here for 15 years and just continued working on that. And what I want to talk to you guys today about is we've seen this space kind of evolve over the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, and really thinking about it more from the entity analytics side and less about trying to disambiguate different data sets or bring the same, look for different misspellings of different data sets, because there was a time, where that's what it was all about. It was about trying to do data cleansing. You have Scott G. Nichols in this data set and Scott Nichols in this other data set, and tie them together so they represent the same person. And that's all still good and it's all still valid stuff, but what I want to focus on today is really thinking bigger and thinking more about entity analytics and what exactly that concept means. And so if you look at things like people, for example, most of us have not lived at one location, right? We've lived at many locations over our lifetime. We get tons of different jobs. I used to work as a Chinese linguist in the Air Force, right, for many years, and then I was a software engineer for a long time, and then a program manager. I mean, I get different jobs. My case is a little different. I've worked at 2 places, 2 companies, but a lot of us have worked at many, many companies over times. And so, we change our phone numbers, we move, our relationships change, and friends change and stuff. And so when we think of that from a data analytics point of view or from an analytical point of view, and we're trying to analyze data, why are we still trying to do it record-based or kind of flat-based and not looking at all the entity when we're doing that? Organizations change all the time, right? Their leaderships change, they evolve and grow. And so the concept and the way that Novetta approaches a lot of this is trying to holistically look and take all that information from different places and trying to bring that together into a cohesive picture so you can actually use it in a usable way and find these things, looking at all of that. And when you look at products, I mean, it's not just people and organizations, right, or just a small number of entities, but one of the things that we've learned over the years is, there's a heck of a lot of different interesting entities or types of things that businesses and organizations are interested in, right? It might not just be people or organizations, but your products, the way they appeal to the market and the way they appeal to different customers and demographics, that could change over time, right? And so being able to model and look at different kinds of entities, whether it's products or devices or whatever it is, is a very useful aspect. And it's really kind of the core of what Novetta is trying to do, and where we see a lot of entity analytics coming to is trying to make use of a lot of this information versus always looking at it as a single record and a single data source, linked with another record and another data source or something. And that's what entity analytics is all about, right? It's being able to use all the information, whether it's current or historical, trying to take, if you have, there's a lot of systems out there where you have your customer data is somewhat resolved, but there's a ton of transaction data, whether it's in healthcare and you have claims data, or it's in a business and you have the transaction logs and the purchase logs, or, it's in the financial, financial transactions. There's all kinds of transactions there where you get into a lot of the meat of what you're trying to analyze for your business use case or your value. And so entity analytics is trying to encompass all of that and bring all that together when you're performing your analytics. Obviously, that's where a lot of the relationships or the patterns that maybe you didn't realize exist in your data live. And so being able to go after that is a very powerful thing. And obviously being able to do that across many different data sources, whether that's your in-house data sources or third-party ad hoc data sources that you're bringing in from different sources, different places. Being able to set patterns across all of that is also a big part of what entity analytics is. And I talked earlier about being able to model different things in just persons or organizations. This is something we're seeing a big trend in when we look at organizations out there. Is there's a lot of organizations, and one of the terms that I use for that is flexible modeling, right? So it's being able to kind of model your world based on your business use case, right? So being able to, if your use case is, you know, we want to look at devices and how they're connected to other devices or to their cyber, whatever it is, right? Being able to model it for that use case and do your analysis and then turn around and model it a different way to look at the persons of the organizations and be able to have that agility to do that, I think is a really powerful thing, and it's where we're seeing a lot of this space want to be able to go, right? And obviously finding anomalies and outliers, that's also always been kind of a good and something that's entity analytics lends itself to. One question we get asked a lot at Novetta, and when we start looking at our software, is, you know, what's the difference between you guys and, say, like a master data management, or why is this not just a master data management platform? And I think where the big difference here when we think of entity analytics really comes down to the flexibility that you get and being able to model almost any entity that you can think of is one of the big things. You're not tied to just a very simple schema or a limited number of types of entities. It's not a huge amount of effort to add in new entities into the mix. And being able to handle data at the scale, right, that you need to be able to do these analysis. But, you know, you've got a Hadoop cluster, and so you probably have a massive amount of data on a Hadoop cluster. And so being able to analyze at that kind of scale, most MDMs will, you know, manage the customer data, but maybe not the transactional data as well. How do you agile enough to bring in third-party data easily and allow analysts to be able to do that? And so that's where we try to differentiate ourselves, and where we see entity analytics coming in as a big thing and stuff. In the tool, I'm going to show you here a demo in just a few minutes, but the tool that we're going to talk about, and when we think of Novetta entity analytics, we really focus on 5 pillars or 5 things that we do, right? We believe very strongly that, you know, garbage in, garbage out, right? And so we do have some ETL concepts in Novetta entity analytics to be able to cleanse and standardize your data without having to go back to the hardcore ETL shop and telling them to model it that way, right? Since one of the big points that we believe for entity analytics is having that flexibility and that agility, you got to be able to cleanse the way you need easily. And so integration is a big deal for us, right? And integrating lots of different data sources, giving you tons of functions to be able to cleanse that data and standardize it and get it to look consistent. Resolution is a big area for us, right? Obviously, when you do get all that data and you get it all together and you get it cleansed, you need to link the data from data set 1 to data set 2 or across, you know, the different data sets that you have. And so the software that I'll show you, you know, has a very robust strategy language, and you can write a lot of the resolution strategies to resolve that data through. Analyzing and identifying relationships and bringing that together and finding patterns in the data is very important. And so, again, we use the same technology for doing resolution as we do for analyzing the data as well. And then visualizing that data and bringing it out and being able to exploit it is obviously a very important thing because, you know, you can do as much as you want processing up front, but if you don't have a good way to exploit it, that's not helpful. And operationalize, obviously what we realize also is that a lot of customers maybe have their own pipeline or have their own, you know, process for how they want their data to flow, and they just want to use either a bit and piece of this, or they want to plug our tool into certain places. And so operationalize is another big thing for us, right, is making sure that we're not forcing customers to say, you only can do this little bit or that little bit. I'm going to switch and show my screen and kind of walk through just a high-level demo real quick. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Cool. And so as I log in here, this is what I'm showing you right now is basically our analytics and resolution console. It's called the Metadata Analytics console. And, you know, users, and I'm not going to go through every single function of this as I go through this demo. We did that in the last webinar in February, and so you're always welcome to go back and read or listen to that webinar for a really deep dive into this console. But I'm going to kind of take a more high-level approach as I go through here. But basically all the work is kind of stored by folder, and then users can create different workflows. And their workflows can be either resolving workflows, where they're resolving different data sets together, or they can be linking, where they're doing more analysis and building relationships out of their data. In addition, there's a handful of different types of entities that we do out of the box, but the users can create their own, any entity type that they wanted. You know, if I wanted to say cell phones, I could create a cell phone entity type and go from there. Each of the entity types basically has different resolution strategies that say how the entities can be made up and go together. And these are defined in it's a Python, it's like a Python strategy language, but there's a ton of different ways that you can bring the data together and cleansing functions and scoring functions in there. And the users can basically, and I'm going to walk you through one of the ones that we do here, right? And so this first one here is really resolving persons. But again, it could have been any type that you would have wanted as well. And in this particular example, I've taken 6 different data sources here. We have, you know, these are folks. The first data source, CCR, is folks who can do business with the federal government, right? So it's people who are in the contractor database in the federal government, and so on. And this EPLS is another excluded parties list. And so this is technically people who are not allowed to be doing business with the federal government, and so on. And so there's 6 different data sources here. And the steps are basically, for each of those data sources, you kind of pick and choose what fields you want to map and say what you want to resolve on with those. And so you can, using this UI, you can basically standardize all those data sources. You can, you know, if one data source is called at first, middle, last, and another one has full name, you can standardize that. You can apply cleansing functions. A lot of common things are like phone numbers where you need to strip off the leading ones and zeros, and you can do all that as well. And up here it's showing you the different kinds of strategies that apply, right, based on the fields that you've entered, right? Normally you would basically click Execute Mapping, which standardizes your data, and you can come to this screen and pick which thresholds that you'd want as well. And there's some ability in the application to view, you know, kind of profile your data and see that data as well, more data exploration here. What I want to get to is really kind of showing you, going back to the entity analytics side, when it's all said and done here, you can see that, you know, we have this many records in this particular sample come in, and we have this many records resolved come out across those 6 different data sources. And, you can not only see statistics like that, it publishes the data out to another Hive table, which can be easily incorporated downstream. But you can also go to this screen and create samples of your entities. And so this will basically run a process to see how exactly those records came together and let you kind of review the entity and see whether you agree with what it did or not, and give you some abilities to do that as well. And so, you can see exactly what this stuff comes together. And so basically what the application is saying is it thinks that, these are all the same individual, right, even though they're on different records in this system. And so typically what a lot of our customers will do is they'll do this kind of thing with the persons, right, and then if we move over to organizations, you do the same concept, but like this is organizations with other data sources, and bring those together. And then you can even go farther than that and take linking where you're linking those things together. So you're building relationships now. And because of the way Novetta Analytics works, right, our input basically, it can take its output as input, right? So these are basically the resolved persons or the resolved organizations and linking them. This one's a very simple case for demonstrations on phone number, but that could be a very complicated strategy that's linking on people who are living in the same household or people that maybe attended the same event. And in the case of resolution, we basically emit a Hive table where you have all the entities resolved, and then for linking, we basically emit a link table that links the two things together. Using another part of our application, you can basically then start exploiting that information. And so in this particular case, we have the different data sources here, and this gives you full search capability against that. In addition, you can see the full, like a baseball card view of your individual, all of the documents that kind of make up that individual and the details for them as well. And then when we get to a lot of our customers, you can start building those relationships out, right? So you can start understanding why this and that Catilda's person, in this case, we're linking mainly by phone numbers and by addresses and stuff. But you can start following out and seeing the different relationships that she has, and so on. And so and usually depending on how you defined it, the links, right? So if we had written a strategy in here that was based on households or something, right, then you can define the links over here based on that, so you can start exploiting it that way as well. And so the way that we approach this is really trying to give this flexible ability to both resolve your data as well as link it and kind of iterate through that very quickly, right? So we can do this, on a Hadoop cluster in the scales of billions of records. We've done it, and very quickly, and it allows folks to kind of switch their model back and forth. And this application has a lot more features in here. There's workbooks, and so you can save this and collaborate with other people as well. And so this is more of an investigative portal, right, and being able to do that as well. And so on. So going back to the slide deck, so going back to the slide deck, I think for us, really, entity analytics is really about trying to take it to the next level, right? It's really above and beyond just simply disambiguating information or trying to find the same Scott Nichols in 5 different data sources, because that's all well and good, but that's not going to, there's a lot more to analysis than just simply tying data together, right? And that's basically my presentation. For us, we do go to several of the conferences out there, and our next one that we have on the books is the Strata Hadoop conference in September. And if you'd like more information, you can always follow us at the blog or reach out to me or Novetta.com. And I'll turn it back over to you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Scott. That was great, and I've already got a couple questions coming in from the audience. But before we get to that, I will turn the floor over to Robin Bloor.
Well, thank you for that. I figured that for this, entity analytics is a very specialized area, and I just thought I would speak quite broadly about dirty data and then just focus in a little bit on entity analytics, which is the theme of the presentation today. The interesting thing to me, I've been in computing a long time, and back in, the 1970s, pretty much all data was validated on entry to the computer system, and that was expensive. There was an immense amount of investment in that. The idea that you might get data wrong and that getting the data wrong would throw a system off in some way or other and cause an error. In those days, that was a big idea. And I don't really think it went away until the internet occurred, and then pretty much everybody was inputting data on the internet, and the data got a lot dirtier. So, how does data get to be wrong? It can be accidentally born wrong in the sense that you can just make a typo when you type something in. It can be deliberately born wrong in the sense that you're actually putting in false information quite deliberately. An awful lot of people do that to anonymize themselves on the internet. I've done it by having not separate identities, but separate email accounts, and only using one of them on the internet, and every now and then just putting in a mass filter on that account to stop all the spam. And, it's easy to understand why people might do that. So it's easy to understand that, like, many people have multiple email accounts, and they can actually have multiple phone numbers, and they can actually have multiple addresses. Pretty much everything about an individual can, in one way or another, be ambiguous. Defective sensors and data sources. There's a kind of an idea with the Internet of Things that everybody is suddenly going to get very reliable data, but that's not true. Sensors make mistakes. And therefore, and that's also true actually of all other data sources. Other data sources make mistakes. Well, I mean, most of it's all digital where the error lies, in the sense that there's a digital malfunction that makes an error occur. But it might be soft and it might be hard, but it happens all the time. Data can be murdered in the sense that it can be truncated or it can be overwritten. It can be corrupted in flight. It's very rare because the communications protocols that stop data ever getting corrupted in flight are pretty bulletproof, but it can get corrupted at either end of the message, and that does happen. It can get corrupted by bad software, and it can get corrupted by DBAs. Every now and then a DBA does something to a database thinking that he's fixing a problem, and actually in one way or another starts corrupting some data. All of this stuff can happen. So there's a need to clean data. Of course it couldn't happen in Hadoop, could it? What we've got here is people are interested in understanding real-world data corruptions in closed systems. This is a study that was done at North Carolina State University by actually several guys with Chinese surnames. It's well worth reading just because it's actually really quite surprising. They found 138 data corruption incidents in bug repositories for HDFS, YARN, and MapReduce. only 25% of the data corruption issues are reported correctly, and 42% were silent data corruption, just wasn't spotted at all. No error messages, nothing. You might have had the idea that because Hadoop takes 3 copies of everything, it can't possibly corrupt data. Well, actually it can. And then we come to the person or the customer entity, which is I regard as the gold mine, because it's usually the most valuable entity by any measure. And it's usually the most fragmented. I mean, the number of times that I've run into stories of a company, of an organization having 5 or 6 or 7 different customer sources of customer information, often different customer databases, different views of customer, often created at different times for different reasons. You know, call center customer data isn't necessarily merged with the customer data that you take in the orders system and so on and so forth. It can be contradictory. Well, this has already been pointed out by Scott. It can be contradictory, and that often is contradictory. It's interesting that it's usually out of date in the sense that the only time that you collect information on an individual is at certain kind of snapshots during that individual's life. So, you know, if you took my information from 3 years ago, you wouldn't realize that I'd changed address. I'm not sure how you would actually find out that I'd changed address, you know. And then you get the problem of dynamic metadata. This is kind of an interesting thing in the sense that we normally think of metadata as fixed, and actually it isn't fixed anywhere, to be honest. But the customer entity changes quite dramatically from one time to another, you know. So knowing what somebody's Twitter ID, if they have one, is can now be important information, but you wouldn't in, you know, 10 years ago, you wouldn't have had a field for that in any customer record, because Twitter didn't exist then. And you kind of look at what's happening with social media, and there's new social media craze every, I don't know, 18 months at least, I'm sure. And some of this stuff starts to be important because it's the customer out there in the wild saying things, and if you don't gather that data, then you might, in one way or another, miss the possibility of reputation damage or reputation enhancement that happens out there. The fix to most of this stuff is entity analytics. Really what one entity analytics, well, I've always regarded as entity analytics is just, it's data cleansing gone very, very deep, because it goes beyond getting items of data right or even getting records of data right. It's trying to get an entity right. And there are very few companies that offer this technology. I think there's only Novetta and IBM that actually do. This is the data lake ecosystem, and it's going to be the basis of the first question I asked, really. But as you can see, just by the fact that I can put up a lot of boxes with words on them that actually correspond to very definite processes, you know. Data lineage, data cleansing, metadata discovery, if you haven't got it, metadata management, which is the orchestration of metadata into entities, the governance of data, which can be a whole set of rules, MDM, which I kind of regard nowadays as being the business layer of the definition of data, lifecycle management, which has always been a thorn in the side, but it's become a really big thorn in the side now that we've gone to a data lake approach to putting data into an organization. And then you've got ETL in and out of those situations. It's a complex process, and you will note that I haven't actually put entity analytics as a separate box in there. I would regard that as being part of governance as well as being part of metadata management. And it might also involve metadata discovery. So that's the picture that we have with what we would call the modern data lake, which is evolving, I have to say. There's a curious observation. The fact that data is dirty is also useful information, or it should be. If you discovered that I have 3 email addresses, which I did, and that only one of them is used for my normal correspondence with people, you kind of get the feeling that you shouldn't really just store the main email address because that will always get to me. You should probably store the fact that I've got more than one. You know, and if there are about 3 or 4 addresses in my history, you should probably store the fact that there are 3 or 4 addresses in my history rather than just stay with the current address, because that tells you something about the frequency of movement, and actually the places I've moved from and to might tell you something about me. If I have an alias online and you work out that I've got an alias online, then maybe you should be storing that information. So, you know, the idea that one initially has of the way to cleanse data is to actually fix one value. It probably isn't, but it's probably necessary to keep an awful lot of the values that you know you aren't going to use in any operational sense, but because they're actually giving you descriptive information about the entity that has those values. Having said that, let's get on to some questions. Really, Scott, and the one that, as I was actually watching the things that Novetta does, I thought you did a very good presentation of the coverage. The thought occurred to me is, where would you, I drew a diagram of our data lake ecosystem, not necessarily the definitive one, but certainly a fairly populated one. Where does Novetta fit in that? Or let's put it another way, when you're doing some kind of implementation with a customer that's taking, let's say, most of the components or all the components, where do you fit? What else is required apart from that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so where we fit and where we basically go is on the Hadoop cluster, and we can sit either on the edge node or off the Hadoop cluster and talk to it directly. And typically, as far as the data lake ecosystem goes, the data needs to be in Hadoop and registered through HCatalog, whether it's a Hive table underneath or something else underneath. Typically, it's a Hive table or a series of Hive tables. And where we fit is to bring all that data together and generate it and put it out to another Hive table as well. And so most of our publications that you get out of the Novetta Analytics tool is another Hive table or another HCatalog table that we export to. And so it's relatively simple to take that and export it to whatever else is needed, and be able to take that for whatever the next part of the process is. And so I would say, looking back to your diagram a little bit earlier, is we essentially fit in between the kind of core ETL parts and before you get to, say, the BI apps or that area, right? So it's kind of part in the middle of there is where we'd fit in the Hadoop ecosystem. I can walk through our architecture diagram as well if we wanted to bring that up.
Actually, I think that would be a useful thing. It'd certainly be useful for me.
Yeah, no, I can definitely do that. Give me 2 seconds.
And I just made you the presenter, Scott.
Nice. See that?
There you go.
Can everybody see our architecture diagram here?
Yep.
So basically, looking at Novetta Analytics and the architecture, if this is your Hadoop cluster, you have different data coming into the Hadoop cluster, and this is not part of Novetta Analytics. You're just bringing in your data through some ingest mechanism, whether it's through Flume or Scoop or whatever it is. You're getting your data through and stored into HDFS or into Hive. Novetta Analytics are these blue boxes on here. And so the console is basically sitting on, typically the edge node is where the console is sitting, and there's a CLI component as well. And so typically those are on the nodes on the console, and everything through the console goes through Apache Knox, the REST gateway, to the different services on the Hadoop architecture and Hadoop infrastructure. And we make heavy use of Hive, obviously, HCatalog, and we also use Uzi to schedule a lot of the jobs. No data is pulled out of the Hadoop environment and into the console or into Novetta Analytics in any way. All the jobs go through Knox, on a curve-rise cluster or non-curve-rise cluster, and basically schedules jobs through MapReduce. We are incubating in our latest version, Spark, and that's kind of where we're trying to head and move over towards that. But at the moment, the primary way is through MapReduce jobs to pull that data together and score it and publish it back out to another Hive table as well. Is there questions on the architecture and specifically that I can address, or does that address most of it?
Well, there are a number of, actually I've got a lot of questions. To a certain extent, I'm interested in the metadata situation, because you do metadata discovery, right?
The which one, I'm sorry, the metadata?
Yeah, the metadata situation. You do metadata discovery, yeah?
We do a little bit of metadata discovery in that we basically allow, we look at what's in the source table in Hive and HCatalog, and we allow the users to map that to the whatever strategy they're using for resolution, right? So they can say, hey, this resolution strategy takes a name. I'm going to go and I found, in your raw table, it was called F name or, first name, middle name, last name. They can go ahead and combine those three things together and say put those into full name, right? But we don't technically do discovery in the sense of just set us on a Hadoop cluster and we'll tell you everything that you have in that Hadoop cluster. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, right. There are other tools.
Okay.
I was just kind of interested in where you fitted into that project. Is it fundamentally graphical, your underlying engine? Because the way that I actually was thinking about it as you were describing what you were doing, I was thinking in graphical terms, because you really are all about relationships when you're determining the nature of an entity. So is it a graphical
Absolutely,
term?
right. It is in some senses, right? So the way that Novetta Analytics works and the way we get our scale and our speed, to be able to process billions of records is we kind of go through a two-phase approach where we both partition all the data as kind of a map job, right? And that kind of breaks it up into smaller pieces, which we then kind of divide and conquer on the Hadoop cluster using, statistical scoring and statistical comparisons of those smaller pieces. And that lets us to massively parallelize it across the cluster. And we basically, we do that, and we basically come back with the first iteration of the first pass is basically a big link map for nothing. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's just a bunch of pairs saying this record matched that record is not what it comes out with. We run a very complicated process after that, which does a transitive closure and kind of pulls back what all the entities are. If you're going to do entity resolution, we pull all that together and kind of identify what are the entities out of that as well. And then we apply that back to your source data and stuff it into a new table, right? So, a couple of the big fundamental things for us at Novetta is we've not yet ran into a customer who wants to lose their source data. If you guys ever find one, let me know. But we never ran into a customer that wants to lose their source data. And so one of our mantras is we never lose source data, ever, right? If the customer wants these 15 fields coming in and those 15 fields coming out, they will get that exact thing, even if they cleanse some of their data to get it through the resolution. We typically will cleanse to a clean field and pass both fields through. So we're never losing the integrity of the data. when you're doing this. Some tools might build entities out of your data, but you lose some of the integrity. We don't do that, and ensure that the raw records that come in will come out on the other side. They'll be tagged with a different entity ID to say which ones go to which entity, and customers can do what they want with that, whether they want to roll it up or whatever. But Novetta itself isn't going to lose that information.
Okay, I get it. And I can see why that would be the case. I can see why you handle things the way you do.
Right.
But what I'd like to so if you could walk me through the kind of organization that comes to Novetta with, specifically with pay, because I'm talking about, people might come because they're interested in the technology. But I'm just talking about someone who's got a problem that comes and what an implementation of Novetta looks like. So if you could talk about a particular use case where somebody comes in, they've got a very definite problem, and how the technology was applied and where it was applied and how that process worked. Could you go through that for me?
Sure. Yeah, I can. And so with a lot of our engagements, we're brought in to help companies basically, identify entities and bring different data sources together, as well as being able to build the relationships in those. And so typically an engagement would start off with either a POC or just a demo and kind of showing them, a lot of companies will have a lot of different data sources coming in from different times, different places. Some of it's sparse, some of it has different attributes in it. And so they'll bring in NEA to kind of be that thing in the middle to pull it all together and produce the cohesive reports that they need for downstream systems. And a lot of times that will involve both bringing the data together as well as building the relationships. NEA will be brought in, we'll stand it up, and then the customer will resolve a lot of their data. We'll help them and train them on writing different strategies for whatever their purposes are, whatever their use cases are, and kind of get them up to speed with being comfortable doing that, and then let them kind of go on and be able to run that in a production environment. It's typically how a lot of our engagements go. As far as sectors are kind of the customers that we've been going after, obviously we have a lot of work on the federal space, on the government side, but on the commercial side, we look a lot to kind of financial industries is one area where we focus a lot, and we see a lot of need for using our product and being able to pull the different data sources together and find anomalies, find different patterns in the data. And then another one that we're getting into a lot too is in the healthcare as well, and being able to tie different member systems with provider systems, or with claims data with members, and that kind of stuff as well, and those kind of use cases as part of it as well. Is there more that I can expand on with that for you, Robin?
I was going to say, it doesn't surprise me, the healthcare situation, because in America, at least, the whole of the health sector is horribly fragmented. Pulling the data together in a coherent and trustable form has got to be a high priority right across the board, I would guess. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of interested as to, because you've shown an implementation over Hadoop. Is everybody that uses Novetta using Hadoop, or are there some people that you just, in one way or another, attaching to big Oracle databases or big other databases?
That's a good question. So Novetta Analytics, we do have some engagements where we are on just pure Linux, and we do have an older version of the product which was Linux only and worked on our own clustering technology to do that. And so we do have some engagements that way as well. But the vast majority of our customers who are using Novetta Analytics are on a Hadoop platform, whether it's Cloudera or Hortonworks and stuff. And so that's where we pretty much live a lot of our engagements on. But it's not saying it's the only place that we can live.
Okay, I would like you to make some kind of description, if you can, of the scalability of this, because I'm looking at I'm looking at the whole situation. I'm thinking, you know, if you had an awful lot of data that you dragged in from outside, and you were actually wanting to, let's say, resolve a customer entity, and you actually had, well, millions of customers, you can end up with a really big heap of data. So what have you got in the way of scalability and performance? Is it all parallel programming, or how does it work?
Yeah, and so, I mean, that's one of our hallmarks at Novetta, right? Having to deal a lot with just how we've grown up over the 15 years is trying to build scalable and performant systems. And so we have some customer engagements that are up to 15 to 18 billion records, where we're resolving them, you know, on, you know, within an overnight time period. We have other ones that are you know, much smaller but more complex, you know, and so they also run that way. But scalability and performance that's really what got us into this business, right? And what really set us apart is we spend a lot of time in trying to make sure that our solutions perform amazingly, right? And a lot of that is trying to do that on, we have many customers that are you know, in the billions of records, and being able to do that on the commodity hardware and the Hadoop platform as well. We do see a need and a desire, and we are in the process of kind of transitioning more and more processing over towards Spark, because that does seem like a very powerful way of doing things. But we're okay with what we have right now as well.
Okay, well, I think the last question I've got really is, in terms of, you have a very complete offering in terms of entity analytics in the way that I understand it, and I have been briefed by other companies in this space, so I'm kind of reasonably familiar with it. Where do you go from where you are at the moment? What does your forward roadmap look like? Are there any, you know, extra nuances that you're going to add to that, or is your product just like spread out to the edge of where you operate at the moment?
No, we definitely have a roadmap, and we definitely have a bunch of things we want to add to the product. And really, one of my ideas or kind of things that I want to push for a lot, and I always push for, is I want to be able to build an intuitive tool that it doesn't take an engineer, and when I say an engineer, I mean like a hardcore engineer, to go in and get this stuff done, right? And so one of my big pushes is trying to bring more and more of our abilities up in an intuitive and easy way in the console so that everybody can do it. As far as our roadmap goes and hardcore features that we're looking to add, one of the big ones that obviously I've already talked about transitioning over to Spark, but one of the big areas that we also want to try to start working a lot more in is, you saw me briefly show the strategy language and how you kind of build, you know, how you build the resolution strategies and the linking strategies. And it's not terribly complex, but it's complex enough for me that I want to build a UI around that, and I want to build it and make it more approachable for, you know, data analysts or data scientists out there to be able to use it. I think there's still a lot of work for us in the area of disambiguation, meaning, you know, doing more QA and quality assurance after the resolution is done, being able to kind of re-examine that as well. I think there's also a lot of ideas of trying to even boost up the linking and the pattern detection, right? So when you have these entities and you start building the relationships between them, being able to have the ability to search, not necessarily for Scott Nichols, but being able to search for patterns, right? So being able to say, hey, find everybody who's bought, these kind of products for this, this many times over the last 4 months, right? So being able to kind of do very comprehensive queries that are more like that and be able to run those kinds of things, I think is a really cool idea as well that we're kind of looking to start approaching as well. So we definitely have lots of ideas for continuing forward. We still have a lot of work to do in visualizations as well, and in that area that we want to move towards as well. So that's kind of at a high level.
Okay. I shall pass you back to Rebecca, who has questions from the audience or questions from ourselves.
I do. I've got a couple of really good questions from the audience, and I'm going to throw up this slide because the question has to do with banking. And I know that risk, fraud, and abuse detection is not limited to the financial sector, but certainly is a large concern, for banks and financials. And just to share a quick story, I changed my name about a year ago, and of course, one of the first places you go afterwards, besides the driver's license office and the Social Security office, is the bank. And, it's kind of a big deal. You have to bring in stuff and prove everything. It's not as easy as utilities. And, of course, they changed it right away, got me a new card. Yet the marketing department for this bank, which is one of the largest banks, still sends me letters with my old last name. So they're obviously not using entity relations such as Novetta. But one attendee kind of wants to know if you are hitting banking hard, as it is such a, I'm not going to say volatile, but they do have so many more concerns, rather than retailers and, more regulations and customers and fraud risk and things like that. So is banking one of the sectors that you see as kind of a green field?
It is. I do see that the financial sector and the banking sector as a green field. I think it is important to note, kind of like what the person has said online, is that with banking, there's obviously, and healthcare too, and a lot of the organizations say governance is a huge, huge concern, right? And so trying to make sure you're dealing with all the regulations, trying to make sure that you're dealing well with the data and being a good steward of the data is of huge importance to these organizations and the organizations that we talk to. And so that's one of the big things with our software, is trying to make sure that we're doing that responsibly and meeting the different requirements that are out there based on things. And I think it's one of the really cool things with something like NEA is that because it's pretty customizable and flexible, it's relatively straightforward to apply by different regulations. I mean, just as one example, there's certain states that don't let you use PII for certain things, right? You just can't use an SSN or anything. And obviously, when you think of entity resolution, using an SSN is a great thing for us, right? I mean, that's a great identifier to resolve people on. So, but again, being able to adapt and say, okay, we can't use that in this data source because of these reasons or these regulations. We can look at the address, or we can look at other things that the industry has and that the solution that the company has is a very relatively simple thing to do in Novetta analytics, right? Because it's using statistical matching and it's using built strategies that are easy to tweak and change.
Okay, good. And I'm just going to throw this up there as a reference, but another attendee asked, and it's kind of commenting to something Robin said about agreeing that there is value in the dirty data. And I know you said that, your customers like the source data right where it is. You don't mess with it. You don't destroy it or do anything with it, which means that some of that dirty data is still in there. And, of course, you resolve that as you bring it through your platform. But do any of your customers still see value in dirty data, i.e., trying to use that to understand how it got there in the first place?
Yeah, they do. I think the two points that I can think of as far as value of the dirty data or the original data. One, a lot of times, our customers will want to pass through a lot more. Maybe they only resolve on name and address, but they want to pass through their other 30 or 40 fields, right? Which again, Novetta Analytics easily allows them to do. and use that data for other purposes that they might have downstream. And so you can do that with the tool. I think another thing that it does is being able to, you can detect anomalies in the data. And so when you resolve on so many different attributes in so many different ways, a lot of times you'll find that, just as an example, the demo that I was walking through earlier today, if you're finding individuals in that where they're on the folks who can do business with the federal government, who are on the allowed contractors, and they're also on the excluded parties list, that's kind of a fascinating thing to some organizations, right? Mainly the organization is probably in charge of making sure they're not allowed to do business with federal government. But that kind of a use case can apply to many other places as well, right? And so they do use Novetta Analytics sometimes to almost build entities that, highlight anomalies in the data or highlight the dirtiness of the data or something, in there that's kind of off, right? And detect some of these things, right? So there is a very valid use case, and we have many customers that's kind of what they're using the analytics platform to identify.
Okay, good. And kind of along that same vein, and I know you said that, in a typical implementation, you kind of go in and you help the customers kind of identify how they're going to, tag, filter, resolve. But do you see companies starting to understand that golden, meaning the golden record, does mean different things to different people, and what techniques, I guess, are they using to kind of get everybody on the same page?
Right. So I think that they do understand that the golden record means different things to different people, and I think that trying to, it's a little bit, one of the challenges I think that we face is, whether it means something different to different people or not, most companies still want to have that one golden record that kind of identifies the individual, and being able to have a tool like Novetta Analytics where you can kind of define that, as needed and as flexible as you want is a useful thing. I think the other big thing with that is making sure that even though you might have a golden record that says this is the Scott Nichols, right, and he lived at this address right now, or whatever that golden record is, being able to have right alongside of that, but there's these three other variations, right, that they can get to very, very simply and quickly. That's where the key comes in, right, is there very well might be, just from a business point of view or an organizational point of view, a need to have the golden record, but being able to get at that other information right away is kind of a key thing as well. And I think also being able to have the flexibility of changing that golden rule logic, right, quickly and relatively easily is another differentiator for us, right? We see that a lot where you go into an organization, if they've already kind of pre-set up the rules and don't, they don't know how to change it, and they realize, based on their business needs or whatever, that they need to change that logic or that algorithm that generates what the golden record is. Being able to have that flexibility of doing that is a very powerful thing.
Yeah, I agree, and good explanation on that one. And I know we're going a little bit over the top of the hour, but I've just got one or two more questions.
Sure.
An attendee earlier asked, and I think you kind of answered this, but can Novetta Entity Analytics define different kinds of relationships and links, like lives with, works with, but I'm going to take that a little bit further, was married to or went to college with. I mean, just how far can those types, how far can you go?
So the way that the approach that we take with Novetta Analytics is, especially when it comes to linking, the output of Novetta Analytics is you get this record or this entity linked with this other entity, and we also emit both a score, like something between 0 and 1 to say how you can, and also a score name, right? So kind of the reason for it. And that reason and that score, the 0 to 1, is all based on how the strategies are defined. And so if you can basically write a strategy that says, is married to, right, and that's defined by saying, hey, their marriage date is on the same day, right, in the same location or whatever. However, if you can figure out in that data how to frame your question and write the strategy to that, you can name that strategy is married to, and that's exactly what you'll get out on the end, right? So you'll get out entity 1 went to entity 4, and the strategy or the type, the relationship type is married to with a high confidence or a low, 0 to 1. And again, that score is based on how you wrote your strategy rule, right? So if you wrote your strategy rule to say, if this field's 1 or 0, then is married to is true, then your score is going to be 1 or 0. But if you kind of wanted to say in there, if these 5 attributes are the same, the chances that this person's married to that person is higher than if only 3 of these attributes are the same. You could set that score to say, let this be 0.95, and then we'll say 0.7 is a high confidence. And, so you have a lot of flexibility when it comes into that with Novetta analytics. And you basically have all that logic. We have over 60 different scoring functions that can be used. It can do everything from edit distance kind of comparisons or numeric comparisons or ands or ors or ifs or whatever it is. And so you can kind of define your own logic for how you put that stuff together and the kind of scores that it generates as far as the confidence scores goes. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And folks, I think that kind of wraps up this webcast. I'm going to go ahead and mention our upcoming topics. We've got Innovators next month, kind of a switcheroo on you, so hopefully you stick around in July and don't go on too many vacations and join us for our webcast. And then in August, we have Hadoop and Spark. We do have a Hot Technologies webcast tomorrow. Hope to see you then. And with that, folks, thanks so much for your time and attention. Thanks, Scott Nichols from Novetta, and thanks to Robin Bloor. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.